This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And so I want to give a special thank you to Monty Hurd, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, and to William Lennon, who just made a one-time contribution to the show via PayPal. William writes, "Been listening for years, but as a humble freelance writer I usually can't donate. I have a little spare change this month, so I just wanted to show my appreciation. Love the show." So big thanks again to Monty Hurd and to William Lennon, and to everyone else who's contributed. We really appreciate it. Alright, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 440 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing the Terry Gilliam movies Time Bandits, Brazil, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, The Imaginarium of Dr Parnassus, and The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. And this will involve spoilers for all of those movies, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up we've got Matthew Kressel, making his 16th appearance on the show. He's the author of the novel King of Shards, and his short story The Last Novelist, or A Dead Lizard in the Yard, was nominated for the Nebula Award and was a finalist for the Eugene Foster Memorial Award. His new novel Queen of Static is available now on his Patreon page over at patreon.com/Matt Kressel. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, it's good to be back.
Then next up we've got Tom Gerencer, making his 15th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Realms of Fantasy and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction. His nonfiction book Think Like Google is out now, and his new book How It's Made, written for the Discovery Channel, will be out in December. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Great to be back.
And also joining us today is Chandler Klang Smith, making her 5th appearance on the show. She's taught creative writing classes at SUNY Purchase and Sarah Lawrence College, and her novel The Sky Is Yours, about a surreal science fiction city that for decades has been under attack by dragons, was published in 2018 by Hogarth. So Chandler, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so let's start off with Chandler and have you tell us how big of a Terry Gilliam fan were you going into this panel?
Yeah, Terry Gilliam is probably my favorite film director of all time. I am an enormous fan of his movies. And Brazil is specifically my favorite and was actually a huge influence on The Sky Is Yours. So yeah, I'm a really, really big Terry Gilliam fan. But one thing I'll note is that these are actually, except for Brazil, not my favorite Terry Gilliam movies. My top 5, I think, would be Brazil, The Fisher King, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Tideland, and 12 Monkeys. And we only saw one of those. So I'm really interested in talking about some of the ways that I think these movies represent some of the indulgences and excesses of Gilliam's work, while also having a really, stunning and kaleidoscopic vision at the same time. I think his movies always are visually stunning, and just sometimes in the story department, I think he can kind of give in to a little bit of his self-indulgence. So yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I guess I'll just explain. The reason we're talking about these 5 is because these were all ones that I hadn't seen, and so I wanted to watch them and talk about them. And also I figured, so the ones I had seen, I'm just sort of like a mild to moderate Terry Gilliam fan, but I had seen 12 Monkeys and Monty Python and the Holy Grail many, many times. And I'd also seen The Fisher King and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas just once a long time ago, just once each a long time ago. And I'd also seen the documentary Lost in La Mancha. So, I mean, I had a decent idea of who he was, but people were always talking about Brazil and Time Bandits. I feel like just on this show, just in the last, year, people have brought up Time Bandits over and over and over again. And so I was just like, all right, this is becoming a serious professional liability for me to not know what these, what exactly happens in these movies. So let's just bite the bullet and do it.
And I loved having an opportunity to revisit these because some of them I hadn't seen in a really long time. And there were things that I loved that I'd forgotten about, and things that I found frustrating that I see, having a complicated relationship to other things in his work. So it was super informative and cool to go back to them.
Do you remember how you first got into Terry Gilliam, or do you have any childhood memories of watching Terry Gilliam movies or anything like that?
Yeah, like weirdly enough, I didn't see Time Bandits or Munchausen until I was in college. So my earliest Terry Gilliam experience was actually with watching The Fisher King when I was probably a bit too young for it. Like in some ways, I think I was probably like 10 or 11, and watching it on VHS at my parents' house. And I just found that movie just profoundly moving, which I still do. I think it's such an honest exploration of relationships, and I think that the way that the fantasy works in that is really visionary and terrifying. The idea that he's being pursued by this, this red knight that then turns out to be a memory he has from the most traumatic experience of his life. That was just something that totally, branded itself on my brain permanently as a way to use fantastical elements in fiction. As a window into a character's psychology.
Yeah, and so like just as I said, I'm not a Terry Gilliam expert, but I did some research, and I think that 12 Monkeys and The Fisher King were both scripts that, had already been written, that people came to him, and said, we'd like you to direct this script. Whereas I think the ones we're talking about today were all things that he, wrote or co-wrote, or, that maybe express like his sensibility more than some of the other things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, a lot of what I admire most about Terry Gilliam comes out of the moments when his, visionary escapism comes into some kind of friction with, either something in the real world or, like you're saying, with another creative person's imagination. I think that there's something really, really fruitful for him about there being that dialectic where it's like, he's actually, he's actually directly in conversation with somebody else's mind. Yeah.
Well, so how about Matt? So, kind of how big of a Terry Gilliam fan are you, or were you going into this?
Well, I used to be a pretty big Terry Gilliam fan. I still am, but I have qualifications on that. Like I used to like pretty much stop whatever I was doing if a Terry Gilliam film came out. 12 Monkeys blew me away. That movie just like blew my mind. I know we're not talking about that film. And like as a kid, Time Bandits was like probably one of my favorite movies, like maybe second to like E.T. or Star Wars or something, or Close Encounters. Like if Time Bandits was on TV, I'd stop whatever I was doing and have to watch it to the end. And I wanted a map like that so bad as a kid, just to escape all the bullshit situations I was in. Revisiting it now, and we'll get into that. Like I think my feelings of Terry Gilliam as a director have changed somewhat. I enjoyed the films. I think that he's an incredibly creative director, and I like that he's not doing these traditional Hollywood plots. I think he's weakest when he has those traditional plots, and he's really, really great when he just is like playing in his imagination. That being said, I do think that some of his weaknesses are where he goes too far into his imagination, and then you lose the thread of the story, or the narrative isn't clear. But yeah, I mean, I think he's a very interesting director. I really respect his creative vision, that he's pretty much uncompromising in what he's doing with his films. He's like, this is my vision. I want to do it. I know this goes against like 99.9% of everything that's out there in Hollywood, but this is what I want to do. And, sometimes it works spectacularly. Sometimes it doesn't.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I'd never seen, as I said, Time Bandits, but I had heard about it because my favorite interview growing up was with Richard Garriott, the creator of the Ultima series, and the games all came with this actual cloth map of the fantasy world that you would explore. And he said that when Time Bandits came out, he was just really sort of mesmerized by the map in the movie, and he would just go to the movie. There was like $1 movie theater, and he would just go over and over and over again. And every time the map came on the screen, he would try to draw it in like a spiral notebook, and sort of figure out if there was any logic to it or anything like that.
If you actually look at the map, you're like, how the hell could anyone figure out where they are in this thing? It's not really detailed at all in that capacity. But as a kid, I was like, I wanted that map. I need that map. I got to get out of here.
Yes,
Find
but
me the next time hole.
But that always just struck me that, that kind of like dedication and passion where I'm going to watch the whole movie over and over again just so I can like copy down the map in the like 5 seconds that it's on the screen.
I think that like Gilliam's imagery really invites that. Like Imaginarium, for example, I was really thinking about just how many moments in that movie, you could just freeze it and have that be a painting, like a surrealist painting. So yeah, I just think that that's something that is in his vision, that it makes you want to go back and look at the details.
Yeah, it's funny also, Matt was saying these movies feel long. That's not just in your imagination. These movies actually are long. Time Bandits is almost 2 hours long, and it's the shortest of these 5.
Well, I guess what I mean by that is that sometimes you watch a 2-hour film, 2-hour plus film, and you don't notice the time passing. And in fact, when the film ends, you're like, oh man, it's over. That was so awesome. I really felt time passing in these films, especially like after the hour and 20-minute mark on them. I was like, I'd like pause it and be like, oh, how much time is it? 40 minutes? Like, or sometimes it was like an hour. I'm like, wait, like I thought we were like, nearing the end of the third act. Like, how is there another hour?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. But like, let's get Tom in here as well. So Tom, how big of a Terry Gilliam fan were you going into these movies?
I was a huge Terry Gilliam fan, but I'm kind of like a lapsed Terry Gilliam fan. Like some people are lapsed Catholics. So he was very influential on me, or just a huge source of fun for me when I was a kid. When I was like 13 years old, I saw my first episode of Monty Python and the whole Monty Python's Flying Circus, and was just blown away by his cartoons. And later read, a book read in an interview where he was talking about how he approached the other Pythons and was like, look, I love you guys. You guys are really funny. I want to be part of your show. And they're like, what do you do? And he's like, well, I do these cartoons. And they're like, we're not really interested in cartoons. And he's like, well, no, I have this one where there's this like Bobby and like his head comes apart and like an egg comes out and then it turns into like a turkey, but it's a businessman and it like does it. And they're all just like looking at him like, we don't know what you're talking about. And then he was like, well, he's trying to explain it. And they're like, look, just show us. Why don't you just go make one and show it to us? So he showed him and they were like, wow, this is hilarious. And then they pulled him into the show. And so that's how he became a Python. And I didn't know all that till I got older, but I just was absolutely loved his cartoons as a kid. Loved the free flowing imagination of them and how like one thing would just turn into something else. And there was no like logic to it, but it made some kind of like funny sense in your head. And then when he started making movies, like when I saw Time Bandits, I was like blown away by that. I didn't know it was him. I saw it as a young teen and completely blown away with it. I think I have almost the same exact childhood experiences with every movie we talk about as Matthew does, because the same thing to me. I was just like wanted the map, wanted to be able to escape these situations in my life. But absolutely loved it. And it's still like that movie still to this day holds up to me. And then his other movies, I'm kind of like a sports fan with him, like a sports fan will be like, I'm a Bills fan, but it's a tough life, I'm the same way with Terry Gilliam. Like I every time a new movie from him would come out, I would say, wow, another Terry Gilliam movie. I can't wait to see it. And then I would watch it. And I'd be like, come on, it's got to be good. It's Terry Gilliam. It's got to be good. And then sometimes I would just have to admit it wasn't. The same as Chandler, I really did love the Brazil. I loved Brazil. I thought that was a fantastic movie when I was young. And some of his other movies like Baron Munchausen, all those, I guess we're not going to talk about those yet, but some of his other movies I kind of sit through and go, this one's not so great. I did love 12 Monkeys. I forgot that was him actually. But I absolutely loved it. And I'm not shocked to learn about the Richard Garriott connection because I absolutely loved Exodus. What is it? Exodus Ultimate 3 when I was, I loved that when I was a kid. And it had basically the gates from the time holes, the way they open up those squares, like the rectangles come out of the ground and they're black with like a blue edge to them. That game had those in it. And so I think it was either that one or Ultima 4. I don't remember.
Well,
no,
they're in all of them. The moon gates.
Oh, the moon gates are in all of them. Okay. So it had those and I was like, wow, that's just like Time Bandits. I love that. So it's not shocking to me that that he really liked Terry Gilliam as well. But yeah, as I've gotten older, I kind of, same with Stephen King. I don't really read Stephen King anymore. I read everything of his up until I was like 28. And the same thing with Terry Gilliam. Like nowadays, I don't really, if I see a movie's by him, I don't really seek it out anymore. But I was really glad to be able to get the chance to go back and watch all these. Some of them I hadn't seen, and some of them I remembered from, when I was a young teen or in my early 20s.
Yeah. Well, I guess let me just give you my impressions coming to these, watching them all for the first time. And I wasn't sure I was going to like these movies because I sort of had the sense that they were going to be, kind of like weird for weirdness' sake and not have a lot of logic to them. And so I wasn't sure. I tend to like things that have a bit more logic to them, or, that you can puzzle out the underlying logic at least. And so I was a little bit apprehensive about watching these. So I started off, and I watched them in the order that they were released. So I started off with Time Bandits, and I thought it was a lot of fun. It's definitely, I thought, a product of its time. But I was like, I could definitely see why people really liked this in the 80s. And it was way better than I was expecting it to be. And then I watched Brazil, and I thought that was like tremendous. I really, really loved Brazil. And then I watched The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. I thought it was a little dull. Wasn't crazy about that one. Sort of the same thing with Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. I was a little bit confused and a little bored. And then I actually liked The Man Who Killed Don Quixote a lot more than I was expecting. And I actually liked it probably better than anything except Brazil. So I don't know, that might be controversial among Terry Gilliam fans. But
gasps from that gallery.
But I don't know. So Chandler, what do you think about that? Does that sound, how much do your impressions of those movies align with my impressions there?
Yeah, actually, so I had seen The Man Who Killed Don Quixote when it first came out, and I was kind of disappointed by it at the time. And then rewatching it now, I liked it a lot better. I think that the Adam Driver character is, moment by moment, there's a lot of inconsistency in the writing for his character, where he'll be surprised by things it doesn't make sense for him to be surprised by. For example, at one point, Dulcinea is addressing Don Quixote as if, he's really Don Quixote. And he's like, why are you talking like that? And I'm like, how can you not know that she's in character in a role that you previously cast her in, So there are these momentary things with his character that don't work. But the arc of his character overall through that film is really satisfying, and I think totally works. And I actually think all three of the leads in that film have really interesting arcs, and there's something that seems really human about the way that we sort of see their dreams when they're younger, and then the way that those dreams kind of metastasize in these negative ways, when in later adulthood for all three of them. So I actually, I probably agree with you that of these films that we saw for this podcast, Brazil is my favorite movie, so nothing's ever going to touch that. But probably Don Quixote was second for me. And then, I also really like Munchausen a lot. I think that just some of the set pieces in that film are just totally unforgettable and almost remain in my memory like they're freestanding short films, like when they go to the moon. That whole part with the Robin Williams character is just so funny and gorgeous and unforgettable. And that part where they're playing cards in the ship that's inside of the whale's belly. There are these moments that feel really discreet and beautiful and painterly and memorable. The hot air balloon that's made of the lady's undergarments, but I think that for me, the script of that is even more inconsistent and kind of unsatisfying than the Don Quixote one. So it's I kind of split the difference between them. I'd probably rather watch Munchausen again just because I love to be immersed in that world. But I feel like some of the character stuff and some of the thematic stuff he's trying to achieve in that film never quite deploys.
Yeah, well, all these movies, I have to agree, are unbelievably gorgeous visually and just have the most, sumptuous visuals. And, all the visual stuff is fantastic. But I feel like with Munchausen, I think the failing of some of these movies to me is just the characters are sometimes not that interesting, and so I don't get that emotionally involved in what's going on because it just kind of feels like a dream where it's no, now we're doing this and then we're doing this, and It just sort of feels a little bit random and all over the place. But I think that his sensibility works really well when there's, when it's really funny. And I think that Brazil and The Man Who Killed Don Quixote both have just some amazingly funny character interactions. And I think that that's what sort of makes me like those movies the best out of these five. But so let's get Matt back in here. So Matt, how do your impressions of these movies match up against mine and Chandler's?
Well, first I want to say this, like, I was saying this before, but I feel like I used to love Terry Gilliam more than I do now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm a writer, and then I'm very, like, the thing is, once you start writing fiction or any type of narrative thing, you become really aware of structure. Like it's hard for me, especially if you're in a critique group like I am, it's hard for me to watch anything now or read anything and not think about the narrative structure. And so, like, I feel like I was a lot more forgiving of these films when I was younger. Like Baron Munchausen, for example, which as a, what year? 88. Like I remember
89.
89. Yeah. So I was like watching this film and I was like, oh, this is so great. This is so much fun. And like, didn't really pick up on the fact that there wasn't a lot of characterization going on. There's like, just like you said, like a lot of scenes one after another. And, it's fun. It has kind of a conclusion to it, but I think it worked for me more on the visual fantastical level. I have to say that I've watched Brazil now. I think this was my third time, maybe fourth. And like, I enjoy certain aspects of it very, very much, but overall I find the movie really dull. And I know that like others be like, gasp at me for that. I know like people love that movie so much. It's just like, I can't, a lot of it comes down to, I think just it's the length. Like it was hard for me to really just get involved in this guy's plight. Like, and one of the things that I noticed about all of Terry Gilliam's films is that like a lot of the women tend to be either non-existent or secondary characters, or like, objects for the males to lust after, and they're not really individuated, right? So in this case, I forget her name in Brazil, the woman that he's obsessed with, Jill, right? Jill something. That she's, to me, I was like, oh wow, this is a really fascinating character, but we don't get anything from that. Like it's like she's in the background, and then there's this moment where they're speaking in the truck, and like I have this, I'm like, oh yes, she's so awesome. Like she's like, he's obsessed with her, and she's like, who are you? Like, who's this schmuck in my cab? And like that interaction between them is brilliant. And I'm like, oh my God, she's the greatest character ever. And then we really don't get any story behind her. We don't get any of her point of view. I mean, she's just basically, in the background. And I kind of felt that way with a lot of like Gilliam stuff, with the women particularly. But yeah, I mean, Brazil, like, the sets are great. And like, I love like the ducting, like everywhere you go, like even you have this beautiful fountain, but let's throw some ducks through it. I mean, to me, I saw Brazil as pretty much just like a satire of Blade Runner, right? So it came out like a few years after Blade Runner. I'm sure Terry Gilliam saw it. I mean, there's scenes that I think that were ripped off right out of Blade Runner, but done it in like a kind of satire way.
Yeah. Well, I sort of saw Brazil. It's like I saw it as like it's like 1984 played as a like British comedy of manners, where
yes, 1984 of course is huge influence on it.
You're in this like dystopian world, but that's not actually the main source of stress for the main character. It's actually just like getting into these awkward social situations over and over and over again, and just being uncomfortable. And I just really thought that was funny. But I want to get Tom back in here. So Tom, what do you think of, since you're a real humor writer, what do you think? Do you agree with me that Brazil and The Man Who Killed Don Quixote are funny in a way that the other ones aren't as funny?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Time Bandits is by far the funniest one for my taste, but I agreed with you almost whole cloth on your impression that you said you like Time Bandits, you like Brazil, and you liked Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and then the others you weren't quite as you weren't. What was it, Imaginarium and Munchausen? You weren't quite as thrilled about those, and I felt the same way. I thought Munchausen had some great moments in it. The Robin Williams part, how could that not be great? But a lot of it was just kind of, I felt like I was just kind of waiting for stuff to trying to figure out, like, well, okay, so what are we doing here? What's this going to turn into? And the same thing with the Imaginarium, although that definitely does have a plot structure. It definitely does go somewhere, and it is kind of cool, but it I don't know. It just seems to kind of drag. Even Don Quixote, I thought dragged. There was like a giant chunk in the middle where I was just like, okay, this is just like him yelling her name, Adam Driver yelling the lead female character's name over and over and over
all
again.
These movies I thought should have been half an hour shorter. I mean, just across the board. But and
that's interesting. I don't feel that about Time Bandits at all. I feel like that's almost. I still, I'm not Matt. Hearing you talk about your understanding of plot and structure and characterization, I wish I had that in my head, because I really do aspire to be more of like, a novelist. I'd love to write novels. I've always done fairly well at short fiction, and then when it comes to novels, I just can't figure it out. But I would love to have that structure in my head, but I don't have it in my head. But maybe that's, that lets me enjoy movies like this a little bit more. But I absolutely feel like this is having given that qualification, I feel like this is just a perfect movie. I feel like Time Bandits is just... Oh,
I love Time Bandits. I mean, yeah, okay, I think that certain directors are really, really good at setting up characters right away, so you don't need a lot of backstory. I recently watched Goonies, and like all those kids, they get like zero backstory. They're cliches, but they're just like, boom, you know who they are. That's all we need. And like Time Bandits, it's like, yeah, they're like, they were doing trees and shrubs for God, and they're like, you know what? let's go steal the time map and become, thieves throughout time and space. And I'm like, yes, like I'm with you. Like I'll go anywhere with you. Like that.
Yeah.
And like they were just so, and like, the Time Bandits, like besides the leader, they're all kind of interchangeable. Like each one doesn't have that much of a unique personality, but as a group, you love them. So like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I feel as if Time Bandits has a very clear, like, narrative structure from the start. They stole the map. The Supreme Being's trying to get the map, but the Devil's also trying to get the map, right?
Yeah.
And like, so like one of them's going to win at the end. Where like, I thought that, like, for example, the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, like, I love the setup. I love this idea of this immortal monk who makes a deal with the devil. Now, the nature of that deal, I couldn't quite figure out, like something to do with souls, but I didn't understand what exactly was happening with the souls. But
yeah,
this idea that he makes this deal with the devil, and then his daughter is the price. Like, that's an amazing setup. And I love this idea that they have this like traveling house, basically, that is also their stage. That's like, led by horses, pulled by horses. And Heath Ledger was amazing in that. But it was like, I feel like somewhere in the middle of that, it just like, it all kind of gets muddied. And then by the end you realize, oh, okay, Heath Ledger, he was really a thief, and he didn't have amnesia, and he was a criminal. He was selling like children's organs, I think. So like, all of that's there, but what happens is, I feel like Terry Gilliam's strength is also his weakness, right? So his strength is his imagination, his creativity, which is gonzo, and I love it. But that's also his weakness, because sometimes he goes so far into his own imagination that the story gets muddied. Like you said, Dave, each of these could be 20 minutes shorter. I think maybe 40 minutes shorter. And like if that movie had a really good editor, it would be Imaginarium would be fantastic. But the fact is, it sags in the middle, and then by the time I get to the end, I'm kind of like, okay, I guess we're here.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if you know or not, but Heath Ledger died midway through filming,
right?
And so that's why the Jude Law and Johnny Depp and Colin Farrell like play him in the sort of fantasy world. So who knows how much that kind of derailed the story. But
I'm sure. I mean, I think he tried to produce the film like for 20 years or 15 years before he got it through, and a lot of false starts. Yeah. And Heath Ledger's death, of course.
Yeah.
By the way, I think he handled that amazingly well. Like the way what he did in the movie. I remember when that happened. I remember being like kind of, by then a lapsed fan of Terry Gilliam and being like, oh, he's making this movie. And then, I loved Heath Ledger in the Batman movie. Which, I don't remember which one it was, one of the Dark Knight movies. But I loved him in that. And then when he died, it was such a horrible tragedy. And, I remember thinking about him and, Philip Seymour Hoffman, same thing. It was heroin, right? Overdose?
Yeah, I think so.
And I remember reading the articles about it and being like, oh, it's such a tragedy. And then reading about how he was in this Terry Gilliam movie. And I remember thinking like, oh, poor Terry Gilliam and obviously poor Heath Ledger, but poor Terry Gilliam is in the middle of this movie and now he can't finish it. And then I remember reading articles later, well, he's still going to try to finish it. He's going to use Johnny Depp and, he's going to use these other actors and kind of swap them out. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, well, that's a good like tribute to Heath Ledger to do that, to not give it over to someone else and have them reshoot everything. But I don't know how it's going to work. Well, when I watched this, though, that all kind of came flooding back because it was a long time ago when I remember reading those articles. Mm-hmm. But that all came flooding back when I watched this. I was like, wait a minute, why is Johnny Depp here? And then I was like, oh, yeah, this is that movie. And I was blown away by how well it worked. I thought, every time he's in the real world, he's Heath Ledger. But every time he goes into the Imaginarium, he's somebody different. Because the way that, the order in which Gilliam shot the different scenes. But I was like, no, this absolutely works.
But he made it work narratively because Heath Ledger's character wanted to escape, right? He wanted to have a different life because people were out to kill him. So in his own imagination, he's somebody else.
Right.
He's also a grifter, so
if I hadn't known that whole backstory, I wouldn't have even thought there was anything wrong. I would have been like, oh yeah, that's how that worked. If I hadn't known about Heath Ledger's death, I would have thought, yeah, this is how this movie works. So my hat's off to him for the way he handled it.
I want to get Chandler back in here. So Chandler, as I said, I was not totally clear what was going on in Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, and I feel like I basically understood what was going on, but a lot of times I just didn't know what the stakes were and, how I should feel about this or, whether this was a serious problem or not. So I'm just curious, did you feel like you understood, like how well do you feel like you understood what the stakes were and what was possible and not in this world?
I feel like I understand it, and I think I also understand why it doesn't quite connect. So I think like one of the problems is that the wager that he has with the devil is this thing about first to 5 souls. Within the Imaginarium, there's always a choice. And we see an example of this at the very beginning of the film, that there's sort of a difficult path for the person and an easy path for the person, a sort of instant gratification path and like, a path that requires something more from them. And those are the paths that are like, aligned with, like if the guy at the beginning, he's drinking heavily in this club, he wanders into the Imaginarium, and then he has this option to climb these steps up this mountain toward enlightenment, or to go to the saloon that's run by Tom Waits, like who plays the devil. And yeah, so the idea is that Parnassus and the devil are sort of duking it out for people's imaginations, and that the world and the choice that is crafted for them emerges from those characters' imaginations. But I think that this like runs into like a bunch of world building problems because, for one thing, we're told that whenever there is more than one person in the Imaginarium, it contaminates it. And then almost every case after that first one, where we see the Imaginarium, it's multiple people in there, often including Heath Ledger's character. So it's like constantly, it kind of like sets up this thing that's already a pretty complicated idea, and then it immediately complicates it more. So I thought that was like a bit of a problem. I think another problem is that it seems like the devil is going to be the sort of real antagonist, that he wants to win the soul of Parnassus's daughter, as the prize for this wager. But then he actually turns out to be a really good guy who doesn't want to do that. And for me, that just did not work at all in terms of the stakes. I just thought it was... I found it hard to believe that Tom Waits' devil character would be truly malevolent because I absolutely love him. But I just feel like if you're trying to create that friction around this already super high concept, then adding this complexity about like this character has a different persona than it makes sense for them to have in the story kind of just makes it, I don't know.
I didn't take it that way. Like I didn't take it that he was feeling bad. I took it that he was bored. Like I took it that like he likes to play these games and have these challenges. If he wins, there's no challenge. Even the devil himself needs to be challenged. So like that's why he's like, you know what? Let's make another wager. You know, I won, but I don't want to win. I want to still be playing this game with you because that's more fun than winning.
I agree with Chandler 100%. I agree 100%. That was the part about the movie that really, apart from it being a bit long, especially in the middle, that part of the movie at the end, I was like, I don't get it. And I think that comes out of, you know, like you said, he's got this great imagination. And in a lot of ways, you know, if you read, there's a book called Lateral Thinking by Edward de Bono, where he talks about how creativity is just taking things that aren't creative and then standing them on their head, or putting things together that don't go together in a new way. And I think that's what Gilliam's great at, is he takes these things that you wouldn't think that this would go with this, or you know, he can never just have, you know, the devil just be evil or something just be the way it is. He's got to take everything that we take for granted and be like, aha, but it's not what you think it is. Nothing can ever be what you think it is. And I think a lot of times that's where his most brilliant ideas come out of. But a lot of times I feel like sometimes you just have to have things be what they are. Just to, like you said, to add that extra layer of complexity, you kind of go too far in some cases and get a little too much complexity. And once Tom, and I agree, Tom Waits is absolutely amazing. I thought he was kind of wasted a little bit in this role. I didn't feel like I was like, oh great, it's Tom Waits, he's playing the devil. And then the more I watched him, the more I was kind of thinking, yeah, but he's not really, he's just kind of going through it, I feel like.
I don't know. I thought he was super creepy in this. I thought he was great in this. And like, yeah, I mean, I didn't think that the devil had any redemption arc. I think it was just, for him, it was just, you know, he needed to have this challenge.
Can anyone explain to me the part where they're having the sort of women in the mall go into the Imaginarium and they're all having this like blissful experience? Because that seems completely different from how the Imaginarium functions at every other point in the movie.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I think that is another world building problem. So Dr. Parnassus has this ability to create this dreamscape that's custom made for the person who enters it, which is something that so many people would be interested in doing. And there's no reason that this couldn't be something that was a sort of high class affair that could get them money and worldly comforts if they want them. It's not clear to me if we're supposed to think because he was a monk in his life before, he's taken a sort of vow of poverty with how he approaches the show. But then when Heath Ledger suggests, I'm going to sort of change things up and have a more upscale version of our show, he immediately goes along with it with no resistance. So number one, I think that's a world building problem that just doesn't make any sense. So then the idea there is that Heath Ledger's character sees that like there's this opportunity to sort of class up what they're doing and get more money from people because he's a grifter and that's what his focus is. And he's also really seductive. So they have these women, you know, in this upscale shopping mall entering the Imaginarium, and the stage has been sort of reimagined to look like more like a fashion shoot or something. And then pretty much every time Heath Ledger is able to direct the women to give their soul to Parnassus instead of to the devil, there's that moment in the one that we see fully dramatized where the woman goes in and at first she just wants to go to a hotel with like the Heath Ledger character, who I believe is played by Johnny Depp in that sequence. And then he says, no, but instead of, we can either go to this hotel, which is the devil path, or you can enter the realm of the Immortals. And there are these like gondolas with images of like Princess Di and various other beautiful people who died young. And so she chooses that immortality because he presents it so seductively. And so the idea is supposed to be, now that Parnassus has this guy on his side, that's going to help him in his wager with the devil because he can sell the path to enlightenment in a more glamorous way, I guess.
I didn't understand that though. Like he was offering them immortality by dying early, or at least to the first woman, I didn't understand how that was.
Then she doesn't die. She just leaves the Imaginarium. I mean, there are definitely world building problems in that movie in like every scene.
Like, I think it was pretty clear when the drunk goes in and he could go to the bar or he could go the other direction, and he chooses the bar, and then the bar blows up, right? So like, I think that was clear, like, oh, you chose this self-destructive path, and then you don't get out. But like, yeah, for like when the women were going into thing, I'm like, I don't understand what's actually happening to them. And, they're coming out. Are they different somehow? Like, because one of the themes that I see repeated in Gilliam's work is this idea that, like, with the, scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, we shouldn't throw away the imaginative aspects of human culture, like the irrational, right? So I feel like the Imaginarium was like encouraging that, right? But it just it gets like, it got muddied in there. Like I wasn't sure.
Well, I feel like that's sort of the thing with all these movies, to my mind, except maybe Brazil, is that there's like so many things stuffed into them that it all kind of, it doesn't focus on, and it's not focused enough. And I did feel that in Baron Munchausen, because that's set up to be a major theme in Baron Munchausen, what you were just saying, Matt, the sort of age of reason versus the age of superstition. But it kind of like, I don't know, it sort of got lost in there somewhere. And I thought, I forget who said it, but like the one scene in terms of the characters that really moved me in Munchausen is where all the heroes come back, but then they're too old to, they can't do they don't have their superpowers anymore. They're, and the little girl's like, no, you have to, don't you understand? They're old now. And I felt like that was like the most poignant part of the movie, where you expect there to be some real like character moment. But then he's just kind of like, come on, guys. Yeah. Have a good attitude, and then they all have their superpowers.
I don't know. I think that does further the theme you're talking about of Age of Reason versus Age of what was it?
Superstition.
Age of Reason
Superstition.
Age of Superstition. So he is all about. I thought, if that movie had been shorter and had a good editor, like I think Matt said, it would have been a really good movie. And I think that if you really, you have to pay attention to figure out the theme and to watch the story, what he intended the story to be. But I think it speaks to what Terry Gilliam himself feels, is that, here's a guy who started out making these free-flowing short cartoons that everybody actually absolutely loved for their inventiveness. And now he's got to be making Hollywood movies where you have to have a plot. And so those are two things that are warring in his head. Well, I think the reason the story of Baron Munchausen appealed to him is because that's the same conflict going on in that movie. Is, people are telling him, no, you got to be rational. And he's saying, no, I want to be creative and free and like do all these awesome things that I can do. I want to use all these superpowers and this, this team of heroes that has all these superpowers. I don't want to think about reason and why things don't work and why you can't sail to the moon and all that. I just want to do it because it's really fun. And so when you get to the end, that is the resolution of that conflict, where the little girl is saying, no, you have to understand, this is reality. They're old now. And he's like, no, we're sticking with the age of superstition. We're going to do what I want to do because I want to do it. Even to the point where he dies. And then he's like, it's okay that I died because this is part of my story. Which, by the way, if I can just quickly finish this point, that's the way the movie starts out, with that frame story where he interrupts the stage play about himself, where everybody is laughing at the things that go wrong with the special effects, and people can see the strings and the set's falling apart and it's not working. And he's like, no, that's not the point. Like, never mind all that stuff. What matters is the cool things that I want to show you. So, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, but that sounds great, everything you just said. I just feel like, in terms of the focus on the feelings of the characters, is too quick. It's like, if that's what the story is about, is this big, if it's all building up to this big moment where the characters where there's this choice between acknowledging reality and superseding it or whatever, transcending it. I just feel like it happens way too fast. If that's, so emotionally it doesn't really hit me. It just feels like,
I agree.
I don't think you're supposed to necessarily feel the like character arc of the secondary characters. Like I feel as if in a way the viewer is the character, right? Because the story is so irrational. Like, well, of course we can sail to the moon, and of course we can, like, the moon, the arc of the moon, the crescent of the moon, you can just, put a lasso on it and climb down and cut the top rope from the, and use that to tie it to the bottom and still hang there. It's like basically he's saying, like, follow your imagination. Don't always necessarily follow what you think is rationally possible to happen next, even to the point of his own death. I mean, and so, like, I think, like, he was basically trying, like, you, the viewer, are the arc in Baron Munchausen. That's how I see it, like the character arc. It's like you're starting off with this rational story, and it's very, very irrational, and you get to the end, well, like, that didn't really make sense, but what a journey, right? What a fun journey.
I would say that, there's that expression about, like, a writer is supposed to have a shard of ice in their heart. I don't know who originally said that, but, like, I would say, the same thing applies to all of the narrative art forms. And I think that, like, sometimes the problem is that Terry Gilliam isn't willing to have that shard of ice in his heart. But when he's at his best, in his films, there's always a fabulous character, an escapist character, a character that kind of represents the imagination. And in his strongest films, that character meets meaningful opposition. I think that Terry Gilliam, probably in his own life, in his own artistic career, has so often felt that he himself was battling against these opposing forces, that he sometimes doesn't really want to give those forces to his stories because he loves his characters too much. He doesn't want them to have to, endure that struggle. But when he does it, when he has, the unstoppable force of the imagination run up against the, immovable wall of reality, I mean, that's just when he just completely shatters me. And I think that the ending,
like Fisher King, right?
Fisher King and the ending of Brazil, which is my favorite sequence in any movie. I think that I don't know if I've ever watched it without crying. I mean, I just find it so moving that, Jonathan Pryce's character is, being tortured, and then, the rescue troop comes in. They save him. He runs at, madcap speed through all of these obstacles. And then, he and Jill finally are off riding into the sunset. And then we realize that his mind has been shattered and that all of that was in his head. It's so, I think it's so incredibly poignant because, Gilliam allows himself to depict all of that beautiful stuff. And then he also allows himself to depict the reality that surrounds it. He pulls out and you see the edges of that frame.
Well, that was the one time, like, usually they say, oh, having it end with "it all was a dream" was really disappointing. And like, it fell flat. But in this case, like, I think it really works because when he escaped and he gets the girl and they're driving in the sunset, I'm like, that's kind of weak. But then you realize, like, oh no, it's all a dream.
Well, actually, could I ask you, Chandler, since you've seen this movie repeatedly, at the very end, the Michael Palin character says something like, or they have a conversation that goes something like, he got away from us, or we lost him, or something like that.
He got away from us. And then you're right, he's gone.
And I wasn't sure, is that supposed to be triumphant in any way, that he's escaped into his imagination and he's not, like, in their clutches anymore, or is it supposed to be a complete, like, downbeat, defeated ending? I wasn't sure about that.
I mean, it really depends on your perspective, I think. Like, I think that's up to the viewer to decide if there is a triumph in escaping into your own mind, away from reality, or if that is ultimately a failure, that it would have been better for him to, consciously endure the torture and then meaningfully resist in some way in the society. It's like, I don't know. Like, I think that that's ambiguous, and it's meant to be ambiguous because I also think that, like, Brazil is really a movie about a character who is, for most of his life complicit in this system. He doesn't like it, but he goes along with it and even actively participates in it. He's part of that bureaucracy. And, so for me, the real triumph is the fact that he stands up to it at all in the first place. But there's a point beyond which he can't go. And I think that Gilliam is incredibly empathetic with him. But I also don't necessarily think that that's an act of heroism. It's an act of being shattered by something that's, steamrolling over you. I think that the comparison with 1984 is really apt. Like, both of them are really about these.
Well, they have the exact same
characters.
plot, pretty much.
Yeah, they totally. They totally do.
I agree about the ending too. And when I first saw this, I had two very different experiences with this movie when I was, I don't know how old I was, in my early 20s versus now. In my early 20s, that ending that you guys are talking about, I was like, oh, it's an Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge ending. It's a Jacob's Ladder ending. There was another 80s movie called Jacob's Ladder that a friend, I've just ruined the ending for anybody who hasn't seen it, but a friend of mine at one point was like, oh yeah, we went to see that movie Jacob's Ladder, and I was like, don't tell me anything about it. I really want to see it. And he goes, oh, I won't tell you anything, but have you ever read that short story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge? And I went, no. You just ruined the movie for me. He goes, how did I ruin the movie? I was like, come on.
Well, it's funny because, I'd never seen this before, but it's approaching the ending, and all of a sudden, like something that somebody said in an episode, of this podcast, like 9 years ago, popped into my head, where we were talking about some other movie that you haven't mentioned, where they're like, they totally ripped the ending off from Brazil, and I was like, God damn it! Now I know how this movie's going to end.
One thing I will say, just super fast though, in comparison with 1984, if you're thinking, is the ending of Brazil triumphant or not? The ending of 1984 is he loved Big Brother, but the ending of Brazil is he still loves Jill. So in that sense, he does triumph. So
yeah, I agree. And when I first watched this movie when I was young, I was destroyed by the end of it. I was like, that is such a mind bending movie. Like, he gets to the end, and of course, I could tell even the first time I saw it that the ending was too much of a dream sequence. And I was thinking he's probably getting lobotomized right now. And then at the end, when that's what happened, I was like, I knew it. That's such a gut-wrenching thing. It's such a tragedy. And when I watched it again this time, though, I got the same feeling, and I agree 100% with the Blade Runner comparison. In fact, the end of Blade Runner,
happy ending.
he wanted to have a sad ending. The director, was it Ridley Scott?
Scott, yeah.
Wanted to have a sad ending, and the studio made him redo it with a happy ending. Mm-hmm. So he took the opening scenes, the opening shots, aerial shots from The Shining, and made those the ending, like that they're flying and here's what they're seeing. He's like, fine, it's The Shining though. At least I know this is still not a happy ending. And I mean, I read that in an interview, and you can 100% trust me because my memory is infallible. But
well, you don't need to tell Matt Kressel anything about Blade Runner.
You are right. It is from The Shining. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the thing about the elevator too, like the elevator in this movie, I got confused with the elevator in Blade Runner going up to the penthouse to the the Overlord's apartment. When I watched this movie and he did the "Here I am, JH" line, I was like, oh, I thought that was from Blade Runner. I got that confused. But when I watched it again as a 51-year-old man, that ending, when I was watching it and thinking, here comes the tragic ending. I was watching, like, everything you said, Chandler, I 100% agree with about how he's complicit, and you too, Matt, about how he's complicit in this horrible society, but he starts to rebel against it, and isn't that awesome? But I also started to pay more attention to the Michael Palin character, and he was, talk about a conflicted character. He was, like, so high up, but he's, again, is just a cog in the system. He's like, oh, so how's your kids? He's like, wants to be a nice guy, but then you see like him interacting with his kids and you're like, he's not a nice guy. He's completely broken. He's completely twisted by this society, but he wants to be a nice guy. And at the end, I had a totally different experience where I was like, I think, and I don't know if I'm right about this. It's this, again, like you said, it's subjective, but my experience was, I think he was trying to set his friend free in the only way he knew how. And I think he was such an artist with that sharp, pointy tool he used that he was like, his job was to, based on what he did to the other people that you see him torturing, his job is to pull information out of people. And he did not do that with, what's the guy's name?
Interesting take.
Yeah, that's really
He didn't do it with him. He like went in harmlessly.
Now I have to rewatch that last scene just to see that.
Yeah, I that was the way I took it, is like, and because he smiles, he goes, nope, he got away from us. And he was like smiling. And I was like, oh, he set him free in the only way he knew how to set his friend free. And then, whether or not you can say, the main character could fight back in some way. I think the movie is saying once a society gets to this point where everything is so locked down, there is no freedom anymore. There is no escape. There is, like, he says to her at one point, to the female lead at one point, to Jill, we're gonna escape, we're gonna do whatever. And she's like, there's no escape. You can't escape. And I think that's the kind of the message is, look, the only escape that's possible for anybody, any individual in that society, is to retreat inside their own mind.
I want to get Chandler back in here. And Chandler, earlier Matt said all sorts of criticism about this movie, including that, the female character is underdeveloped and stuff like that. I was just wondering if you wanted to, since this is your favorite movie, if you wanted to respond to any of that.
I mean, I actually, I do think that in some of Terry Gilliam's movies, the female characters are more of a plot device than like fully developed. But I think that like the reason that in that department I wouldn't criticize Brazil, there are a couple of different reasons. One is that it is very much a first-person perspective that we're in throughout the film. Sam Lowry's fantasies are placed on equal footing with like real scenes in terms of like, taking up visual space in the frame. So we're kind of constantly seeing everything from his perspective. And I think that it makes sense that he doesn't, part of what's fascinating to me about Jill is that like there are all of these clues that she has a life outside of his perspective. And we don't have access to that, but neither does he. And, so to me, that seems like it works. Like she has that bandage on her hand and we never find out what that's all about. Clearly she has this, I feel like she's been a participant in some kind of resistance within this world. And like, it's left mysterious and that makes her really intriguing. So I don't have a problem with Jill. And I also think that there are other female characters in the movie that are really complicated, like Sam Lowry's mom. I think she is a fantastic character, was a big influence on a character in my novel, The Sky Is Yours. There's a mom character named Pippi Dahlberg in my book that, I kind of pictured someone very similar to the mom in Brazil. And she has the friend who, my complication had a little complication.
Yeah.
So the sort of like avatar of death in the movie is also female, which is not something that you really see in a lot of Terry Gilliam movies. And then there's also the woman that his mom is trying to sort of set him up with. Yeah. And one of my favorite little micro moments is they're having an awkward conversation. She feels humiliated by the fact that, that their parents are trying to like shove them together. And as he gets up to go, this range of expressions play across her face, like rage, humiliation, like, yeah. And you see Sam differently in that moment. You're like, like for me, certainly, like as a female viewer of the film, it's like, to have somebody who is like, so devoted and, fascinated by you, that would be amazing. But then you see that the flip side of that is that, this other woman is sort of invisible to him and he's not really all that nice to her. And you get her perspective just from that little bit of acting,
And that's right after she says to him, like, it's okay, I don't like you either. Right.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
And the mother character too, there is a fantastic scene near the end that just rips my heart out every time where he's like, Mother, please help me. And she's like, stop calling me that, because she's all young now and she's totally beautiful and she's got all these young guys after her and she's just like, leave me, go away, you're not my son anymore, I've got a new reality now. That like, I don't know, that blew me away. For 1 second
her face actually becomes Jill, right? That's in that last fantasy sequence and it's like really horrifying from like a sort of Oedipal perspective. So I just think that the female characters in Brazil, Gilliam often has a single idealized female character in his films who is not given a ton of internal life. And I actually think that that's not true in Brazil at all, that like you have a range of women who all seem to have their own stories going on and who sometimes represent, death or like, complete allegiance to the system in the case of the mom, giving him something for an executive,
I think that's a good point that you said, like this film is pretty much in a really close point of view of Sam Lowry. So we don't really get these other characters, especially like you said, because his fantasies, they're played out as if, in the same attention as the reality. So, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find most horrifying about Brazil that I feel is like, applicable to today is like this idea of just like a society that's taken over by bureaucracy. And like, that's the most horrifying thing. I mean, obviously the torture and all that, the other stuff, but this idea that like you could die because of like
a misprint,
a misprint. Yeah. And this is something that's like, it's real. So like anyone who's ever had to deal with like a health insurance company, right? And it's like, well, you didn't dot your form 17 point B and you didn't fax it in triplicate over to these 17 addresses. Like, it's this, like, I think our, reliance on like bureaucracy to maintain society has actually, only grown. And like, 1985 is like, the beginning of like the personal computer revolution. So I think, Terry Gilliam was looking at it, like you see these computers, like there are these really kind of horrifying things in this world that they just look like mad scientist devices. And that like you have people whose job it is just to like, transcribe someone's screams and that's their role. Like they're just, and that she's doing it happily because that's her job. Right.
Well, and just the moment too, where the woman's husband is being disappeared with the hood over his head and the bureaucrat comes in and says, and here's your receipt for your husband. And here's my receipt for your receipt and all this stuff where, that she knows she's never seeing him again, but there's all this like, all these forms and everything that don't protect you at all.
The legality of it. And like that aspect of it, to me was the most horrifying, I think, of the film.
Yeah. All right. So I want to get
also, I have to say, just really quick, like, I mean, there was nothing cooler than watching De Niro go down a zip line.
Well, the whole scene where he's fixing the duct and then Bob Hoskins and the other guy show up, and that was my favorite part of the movie. The whole like
that's fantastic,
tense, uncomfortable situation there. But I want to get into more about Don Quixote before we run out of time. Just in case people don't know, Terry Gilliam tried to make this movie for like 30 years and it kept falling apart and he had to recast it and restart it over and over again. And there's an amazing documentary called Lost in La Mancha about when he tried to film it with, Johnny Depp, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, 10 to 20 years ago. And the whole, and they filmed for like 8 days or something. And then the whole thing, there was just an unbelievable run of bad luck, and the whole thing got shut down. But I thought this was really, like I said, I thought the first half of this was I was really engaged in it, and I sort of thought it kind of like a lot of these movies, it kind of got overstuffed and too long and a little muddled and confused toward the end. But I thought there was a lot to like about it. But my main thing I want to talk about is like I feel like the sort of the structure of the story is supposed to be that Adam Driver's character gets more and more sucked into the fantasy, or at least the alternate reality, and then ultimately he ends up totally in the fantasy when he takes over as Don Quixote at the end. And I felt like that that moment at the end where he becomes Don Quixote seemed to me to come too abruptly or kind of out of nowhere, and I felt like that being subsumed in the fantasy should have been more like consistent throughout the runtime of the movie. So that's the kind of thing I want to throw out there to see what people thought about that.
I agree 100%. I mean, he just kind of wakes up and he thinks he's Don Quixote. Like this film for me, I thought the setup was great. He's kind of like this, he was supposedly this hotshot director, destined for Hollywood. He shot this beautiful student film in this small Spanish town, and now he's I don't know how many years later, a decade or so, he's there and he's shooting commercials. He never made it to Hollywood. He's kind of and he's disappointed in his life, and then he discovers, oh, the town I shot that film that started this is like just a few miles away. Let me go check it out. Like I love that setup, and then he finds that the actor that he used for Don Quixote thinks he's Don Quixote now. Like that was such a great setup. But I think
Well, yeah, also, and the fact that, like, him making this little movie has destroyed the lives of everyone.
Destroyed the lives of everyone in it, right, including the girl. Although I didn't quite take it that he was 100% responsible for that. Like, I mean, they blamed him, but I mean, you know, so he put an idea in the girl's head that, she's beautiful, she could be an actress. You know, I don't think that was his fault that, you know, she made the life decisions that she did. And I don't think it was his fault that the man who thought he was Don Quixote, I mean, he was, you know, just... But
I don't think it was necessarily that he was to blame, but it's just like it wouldn't have happened without him. But it was more like the blame falls with the, like, sinister power of dreams, or sort of, you know, the toxic allure of fame, or something like that.
It reminded me a lot of... Again, sorry to keep talking about The Fisher King, since that isn't one of the movies we're discussing, but it reminded me a lot of the Jeff Bridges character in The Fisher King, where the key is really that he feels responsible for those things, you know, or at least at moments he feels responsible for them, and that drives his choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think my problem with this film is that it's twofold. It's like, one, I think as Dave said, that like there's a clear character arc for him, but it's not paced well. And then it's just like, I don't know if I find Adam Driver, at least the character he's playing, interesting enough to want to stay with him for, I don't know, 2+ hours of the film. Like, I didn't find his character all that compelling. I don't know if you guys...
I agree. I mean, the same complaint with the other Terry Gilliam movies, except for Time Bandits, which I felt was a short 2 hours, even as a grown-up. I think, yeah, the middle of it's not that it's long. I mean, I can forgive a long movie. It's just that it's repetitive with him shouting her name over and over and over again. After a while, I was like, okay, stop shouting her name. And it's also that, like you said, he just wants to do all these things with his imagination, and none of them are really pushing the plot further along. But I did like this movie a lot. I thought I thought a lot of these movies were specifically designed for old men, which or at least maybe not a lot of them, but maybe at least Don Quixote and Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus and Munchausen. So I guess that's 3 out of 5. But I think they're very good, you know, old man movies, and that means they don't have much mass appeal. There's not a lot of old men who are like, oh, I love movies. Apologies to the old men listening who are like, what are you talking about? I love movies. We're in the minority.
Wait, do you mean that they star old men, or that they're for an old man audience?
I think they're for an old man audience. I feel that way about Munchausen and Don Quixote and Imaginarium. I don't know. Do you have a different take on that, though?
Oh, I just thought you meant that all 3 of those have a lead character who's played by, you know, like an old man with like a great face to sell insurance, like Adam Driver says in Don Quixote, right? Like,
well, that too, but I think they're also, I mean, the dilemma in Imaginarium is, you know, this old man who's like, what does my life mean? And I'm trying to do something. I really want to I want to leave some kind of legacy. I want to save my daughter. Munchausen is, you know, our old people still relevant, in a way. That's one of the themes. And then Don Quixote is, I don't know, it's definitely made more sense to me. I don't know why it's an old man movie, but having watched it, as I was watching it, I was like, I'm enjoying this way more than I would have when I was in my teens or 20s or 30s. I don't think I would have enjoyed this when I was younger, but right now I'm really enjoying it.
It's that same theme, though. Is an old person still relevant in the world, right? I mean...
Well, it's that, but it's also the Terry Gilliam, you know, what's more important, logic or just imagination? I think, you know, it's that too. And how far do you take imagination before everybody who's telling you you're just crazy becomes right? Like, I think that's, you know, which I think that is a kind of an old man theme in some ways too, although it was also applied to me as a young man, so maybe not. But.
Well, I also think, like, you know, a film like Time Bandits is very explicitly, you know, geared towards children, and I felt Baron Munchausen was as well. I mean, especially with the young girl as a central character. The Imaginarium, definitely not. Brazil, definitely not. And like The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, it's dealing with these really, like you said, heavy themes of age and losing relevance, losing importance. And, I think that there were set pieces within the film that worked really well and were affecting. But I think that there were so many like skips along, and part of that may be that just like as I'm going through the film, I'm wondering, okay, is this what's really happening here? Like I don't understand. Oh, okay, this is a dream. This isn't a dream. Like that type of stuff confused me. And then at the end, you're like, okay, he was clearly losing his mind the whole way through, but it wasn't made like I didn't feel that progression.
Yeah, I agree.
Organically, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is that it's not. I feel like it's there's just like weird things like the part where they come out and there's this sort of like glittering knight who he jousts with. Mm-hmm. And then it turns out where it's like, oh no, the townspeople just dressed. They like set up this whole pavilion and got armor and everything as part of this ploy to lure him back to town. It's like stuff like this, like, it doesn't.
That made no sense to me.
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't even as like, it doesn't fall into the fantasy or reality thing at all.
Yeah. I definitely agree. That fake out was super weird and I didn't think really worked. There are a couple of times. There's the part where Adam Driver makes out with a sheep and because he thinks it's he thinks it's what's the female character's name in that movie? I know Dulcinea is her role in his
Angelica.
Angelica, yeah. So he thinks it's Angelica, and I was like, that actually I think maybe even happens a little too soon. It's such a weird moment and it's really, really funny. So I kind of love it, but in terms of the progression of his madness, I was like, that's kind of a non sequitur that happened. And then later I was like, oh, okay, he loses it at the end. So that's supposed to be part of it. But it didn't read that way to me. It didn't seem like it was cluing me into something that was happening with his character.
Are we 100% sure that he went crazy? Because that wasn't my read on the movie when I saw it. Although I'm starting to agree with you as you're talking.
What was your read on it?
My read on it was that Don Quixote was never a person, but Don Quixote is like almost such a strong concept that he becomes a spirit. Like not that he was ever born, but he's such a strong concept and character that he becomes this kind of independent spirit that can possess people. And so down through the ages, maybe he's just been skipping from person to person, possessing, like he possessed the actor, and then when the actor's body kind of wore out, he moved into Adam Driver, and he was building that through the whole movie.
Or Adam Driver's just picking up the mantle. Yeah, that's an interesting read. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just as plausible as that. He went nuts. Like basically, like we're left with he's inhabiting the Don Quixote world in his mind either way. So
yeah.
I actually really like that idea that the character of Don Quixote is such a strong concept that it somehow has its own independent existence and can kind of, possess different people. But I feel like, I don't know that there's much in the movie to support that reading until the very end. Like, is there anything earlier in the, like that's the kind of thing I'm saying would need to be built up throughout the movie.
It's not built up throughout the movie, but there is a scene at the beginning where he's like, I'm a shoemaker. I'm not Don Quixote, and he's totally sane. The guy is totally sane, but Adam Driver is so convinced he's Don Quixote that he becomes Don Quixote. He like forces him to assume this character, and he does. He manages it, but in doing so, he loses himself. And then that, happens to Adam Driver too at the end. And I was like, oh, wow. But you're right. There's not like, if there would have been one more thing about like, there was this guy who used to think he was Don Quixote in these parts as well, but he just died, then that would have cemented it a little more.
Because doesn't Jonathan Pryce, he starts saying, no, I'm just a shoemaker as he's dying.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. As he's dying, it leaves, it was very reminiscent of The Exorcist, where, she's possessed through much of the movie. And then at the end, Father Karras manages to like slam her against the floor, against the wall, or whatever he does. And he's slapping her, and he gets the demon out of her. And he's like, and he tells it, he goes, go into me. And then it does. And then he jumps out the window and dies, and presumably kills sends the demon back to hell while he dies. And when I watched that scene where he's like, no, I'm just a shoemaker, I was like, wow, that's just like the end of The Exorcist. It's like Don Quixote has left him because his body is dying. And then when Adam Driver became Don Quixote, I was like, oh, Don Quixote was just like The Exorcist instead of, but the spirit left Jonathan Pryce and went into Adam Driver.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, like, I kind of feel like what the story is about, though, is more the way that the dreams kind of can take over someone's life, and not always in a good way. So I kind of like, I kind of don't know if the lack of agency for the characters that's implicit in that reading totally aligns with that. But maybe I'm misreading what the theme of the movie is supposed to be too.
It's also,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to quickly say, like, you know, it seems like in some ways, Don Quixote is a more grown-up Terry Gilliam movie, where it is like, instead of the dreamer just being sort of up against this, you know, either not non-existent really opposition, or, you know, or completely our hero, it seems like dreams themselves are something that's like, you know, tugs in both positive and negative directions. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a common theme in his work, in Gilliam's work, obviously. But like, I feel like in his earlier films, like Time Bandits and Baron Munchausen, that like dreams are positive usually, and even in Brazil, the dreams are positive in the sense that it provides escape from this hell. Whereas, like, as you get further along in his career, the dreams there's a little bit of like more sinister aspect to them, right? With like, you know, Don Quixote and Imaginarium, where it's like, yeah, your dreams could be good, or they could go in a really dark direction as well. So I wonder if that's kind of Gilliam wrestling with some of his own ideas as he's getting older as a director.
That's a good point.
Yeah. In Munchausen, especially that ending where it's like, it's revealed that the whole thing was him telling these stories, and you think, okay, now there's going to be some kind of injection of reality. And then, you know, it's like, open the gates, and they open the gates and the enemy is completely dispersed. You know, I guess it's just supposed to be a coincidence, but it seems like it was caused by that. Like, basically, you know, if you fantasize it, it becomes real. And that just seems,
Or
yeah,
like,
I
don't
think that's
discount imagination.
I think that's the theme we were talking about, you know, superstition versus reason. He's like, no, we have to, I think it just comes down to faith. Like, no, you know, have faith in what you're trying to do, and don't worry about the reason. And that's, you know, goes all the way back to Gilliam's roots, making those flights of fancy in those cartoons in Monty Python. Just have faith in that what you're doing is the right thing, and don't worry about the realities that are telling everybody else this is not going to work.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see the development, because Time Bandits has a surprisingly dark ending.
Oh yeah, we have to talk about the ending of Time Bandits.
Yeah, we've given that short shrift. I'm happy you brought that up.
All right, well, let me just say, like, you know, Tom, you thought that I think Time Bandits is funnier than I did, but I did, the thing that sticks out in my mind is John Cleese as Robin Hood, where he has funny. the bandits who are all these like awful, violent people, and then he's super polite and you know, like crispy. And then, like, that was really
everything he says is magical. Like
people.
when he's like, "What's your name?" and he goes, "Cat," and one of the Time Bandits pulls him away, and he goes, "Cat, interesting name."
Yeah, John Cleese was brilliant in that, and I also love Sean Connery as Agamemnon, and I think that's like my favorite scene. Well, one of my favorite. I love the whole movie, but like that scene where he's living with Agamemnon, and he adopts him as his own child, and then he's like, "Oh, we're gonna have this big, you know, festival, this big feast," and then you see the dancers come out, and then the moment when they, like, you know, the little people step down because they were on top of each other's shoulders, and you realize, oh, those are the time travelers, and that you see the look on the kid's face, and that music just builds this crescendo, and then they take him away through the time hole, and then you see just Sean Connery's face, like, wait, like first he smiles, and then his smile slowly fades, and like that, even to today, it gives me the chills. It's such a moving thing, because you really feel that he loved Kevin as a father. And I will say, like, I saw this movie in the theater. I remember seeing it in the theater, and two things scared the shit out of me. The first was when, like, they come into his bedroom, and they start pushing on the wall, and the
I love
wall
that.
just goes further and
I
further.
love
and then,
that too.
And then the Supreme Being's face comes out like, "Give me the map."
Oh, it's so
and like,
great.
You know, as a kid, I think I was 6 years old, 7 years old. I was terrified. I'm like, "Oh my god!" And then at the end, because you're like, "Oh, he's back home." You know, like he's back. You know, and basically it ends like a horror movie. Like his parents touch the ultimate evil, the piece of evil, and they vanish. And then the movie ends, and you're like, wait, like the fire department left, everyone left, this kid's alone. He just traveled through space and time. Like what does he do now? And like as a kid, that was horrifying. Like I was like, oh
and when
my
you
God.
say they vanish, I mean, it seems explicit to me that they combust.
They're dead.
I mean,
They're
They
dead.
explode. They explode. Yeah.
They explode. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it when I was maybe 13 or 14. So I had a different take on it. You know, as a 13 or 14-year-old, you're at that age where you're starting to be like, my parents don't know anything. Before you really become convinced they don't know anything, before, 10 years later, you're convinced they knew everything. But I was at that stage where my parents didn't know anything. And so that really spoke to me, the fact that the family was so hilariously wrong. And the knight showing up in the bedroom was such an exciting, like, that he busts out of the wardrobe it was like a cool, like, Narnia moment.
Yeah.
But it was also like so exciting that like, oh, something's happening. What's happening? And then that scene you're talking about with the wall, that is just, to me, that is like the essence of fantasy. It's like the perfect, fantastic moment. And then when he's coming, the head's coming down the corridor, and with like the Darth Vader voice almost saying, "Return the map," and then they fall into nothingness. It's such a perfect, like, mix of Terry Gilliam's fantastic imagination with plot that it I don't know. This whole movie just blows me away. But you're right, the ending being so dark. I liked, as a 13-year-old kid who's convinced your parents know nothing, I was like, of course that's what's going to, I didn't like it. I wasn't like, hooray, the parents are dead. But at the same time, I was like, of course, the parents aren't going to listen to the kid. He's a 13-year-old kid. He's right. He knows what's going on, but they're not listening to him, and they should have. And I thought that moment was hilarious. And my friends in high school and junior high, quoted that around. Don't touch it. It's evil.
Yeah, it's evil.
Yeah.
I just want to make 2 quick points. One, if you like, and I've noticed this on rewatches, that if you look at Kevin's wall, like where he has all like the little scenes, like toys or like things he cut out of magazines, those are actually the places that he visits.
Oh.
Yeah, like they have the knights, and they have like the toys, like the space toys. And then when they're in the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, if you notice, it's made out of Lego blocks. Like there are parts where if you look at the background, like they're
huge Lego blocks. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like it plays with this idea, like, was it his imagination? But I don't think it was, but it was like, I like that they were referencing each other.
I do too. And I think, I think one thing this movie does masterfully is, I think it's always a mistake in fantasy movies or science fiction movies when there's too much fantasy and it's not relatable enough. And I think this is the perfect mix. I think the kid, Kevin, just absolutely grounds this movie. Like nothing is going to become too far into the imagination because Kevin is always there to pull it down. And in a weird way, he's like an Arthur Dent character too, where he goes through all through time with his bathrobe on. Like that to me, I was like, wow, he's like he's like Arthur Dent Jr.
Yeah.
All right. So I also I don't know if you saw, but this is on the Wikipedia page for Time Bandits. It says, Apple Inc. worked with Anonymous Content, Paramount Television, and Media Rights Capital to gain rights for Time Bandits television series to distribute on Apple TV Plus, with Gilliam on board in a non-writing production role and Taika Waititi as the director of the pilot.
Wow. Taika Waititi.
Yep.
When you for the first half of what you said, I was like, nah, it's not going to work. And then when you said his name, I'm like, okay, it could work.
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued. I wonder if it'll be a different protagonist or if it'll pick up where Time Bandits left off, because, yeah.
Well, it seems like the thing these days is to bring everyone back as, like the age they are now.
Oh, okay. That's probably what they'll do. Yeah.
So the actor who played Kevin, is he still acting?
I'm not sure.
Craig Warnock, I think his name is.
Yeah.
But if he's not, they could cast somebody else, as an adult version of that character.
Sure.
One last thing about the ending, it is really fascinating just from a storytelling perspective, how different it is to have a kid's movie end with like the kid's parents dying instead of beginning that way.
Yeah.
Like so many fairy tales and like, various stories for kids like James and the Giant Peach, I think also starts with like the kid's parents dying. And we'll sort of accept that, but there's something about just like leaving the kid hanging like that. It's really disturbing. It
was terribly disturbing.
I love it, and I would not change it because it's so unforgettable, but I don't quite know what it means or what it is supposed to do for the movie we just watched. It's just like, there's this explosion and the movie is over and you just have to figure it out. I mean, I guess thematically the movie is about how, the universe is in the hands of an uncaring God, and that is the ultimate way of showing that, I guess. So that's a good way to put it. That's an excellent way to put it, and also it could be a little bit that that the movie is also about growing up in a way. I think you'd have to massage it around a lot to make that true, but growing up is a big part of growing up is you lose your parents, and I just watched a great adaptation of White Fang on Netflix with my kids. And there's a part where White Fang's mom, the Jack London book, White Fang's mom has to leave him. She gets sold, and then the owner, the Native American owner, tells him this is what growing up feels like. And I was like, oh, that hit me in the gut because I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. But I think that that moment with Kevin at the end when his parents explode is kind of like here's what growing up feels like. It's very sad. But it's very real.
That was pretty quick. Pretty quick, right? Here you go.
It's a fast grow up. It's like it's this movie. We don't have 20 years to show you what this feels like, so we're going to compress it into the.
But there was also like a hint that there was more, right? Because Sean Connery's the fireman, and Kevin clearly recognizes him, and then Sean Connery winks at him and then leaves. So you're like, oh wait, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So like I always like at the time I always hoped for a sequel. Just to see like what exactly happened, or maybe it was just because I didn't want to imagine Kevin just being all alone with nobody.
Yeah, I also just on the subject of dark endings, I just want to note that there's a really interesting story. I won't go into the whole thing, but the Universal, which had the rights to distribute Brazil in the U.S., thought that the ending was too dark, and they wanted to make it a happy ending, sort of like it happened with Blade Runner, and Terry Gilliam refused. And so they decided just not to distribute the movie at all. And there's this really long, interesting story about how he got it distributed. And the very, very short version is he screened it for students, and then some critics saw it. And then he took out a full-page ad in Variety that said, "Dear Sid Sheinberg, when are you going to release my film Brazil?" Signed Terry Gilliam. Sid Sheinberg was the head of Universal. And then Robert De Niro went on Good Morning America, and Terry Gilliam tagged along. And then, before the interview ended, De Niro turns to Gilliam. This is all like set up, right? And says, "Oh, aren't you having trouble getting this movie distributed?" And so then he like tells the story. And then the critics decided that they were going to nominate it for all their awards, even though it hadn't been released.
Wow.
And then that sort of pressured the studio ultimately to release it.
Good for Gilliam to
Gilliam he's Sam. I mean, he's fighting this massive bureaucracy that's like, no, this is how things have to be. Wasn't that the main character's name, Sam?
Yeah, Sam Lowry.
Brazil? Yeah. He very much is Sam Lowry. Yeah, like that blows my mind. That's like life imitating art in a huge way. Except he won. He didn't get lobotomized.
As far as we know.
We're all just living in Terry Gilliam's imagination.
Right.
It's funny because I watched a bunch of documentary, like mini documentaries about the making of the different Terry Gilliam movies, and like in all of them, the actors look like totally like exhausted and dirty, and and everything, and they're all like, "Yeah, Terry, he's great, he's crazy," and it's like, every single interview is like that. But so actually, I'm curious, Chandler, you said that So the ones I still haven't watched, the Terry Gilliam directed movies I still haven't watched, are Zero Theorem, Tideland, Brothers Grimm, and Jabberwocky, I guess. And you said, I forget, was it Tideland you said?
I am the only person who loves Tideland. And so I will say, I know this movie is not for everybody. it is so amazing. I mean, for one thing, if you're thinking of female characters in Terry Gilliam movies, Jeliza Rose is just an absolutely fabulous character. I don't think I've ever seen a depiction of childhood in a movie that reminds me, not in terms of what happens to her, but in terms of like the way that she engages with her imagination. It really captures the way that it was, you know, there's this like one wonderful scene where she's playing by herself and she actually scares herself. And I remember having that exact same experience in a very similar way, like when I was a kid, where like, you know, she's pretending to be a squirrel and it goes off the rails. And, you know, it's just, it's a really fascinating, horrifying, hypnotic, like exhausting, beautiful masterpiece, in my opinion. I really highly recommend it, but you know, there's some
I saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
I saw it in the theater and I actually really liked it. I thought it's not for everybody. It's like, you know, huge trigger warnings for like child abuse and child abandonment. But I thought it was a really affecting and powerful statement, or maybe not statement, but just an exploration of what it might be like to have to live through that reality. And yeah, I remember really liking it, but it's not like something that you like, hey kids, gather around, let's put on Thailand. You know, it's like, you're going to come out and you're going to feel dirty and you're going to feel like tired, but it's a powerful film. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Oh yeah, and it really explores the limits of the imagination, like, you know, because she has unlimited imagination, and that doesn't like it doesn't allow her to escape in you know, in any kind of way that fixes her circumstances. I mean, at the end, there's hope for her, but it still is really dark, like the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone seen Zero Theorem? Because I'd never even heard of it before, but apparently it looked like it was a more science fiction, you know, Brazil kind of thing.
I saw that one too. Yeah. I like that movie. You know, I only have seen it once in the theater, so it's been a while. It was like whenever it came out that I saw it, but I did really enjoy it. Yeah, Christoph Waltz plays the lead, and he's really good.
Because I guess, I don't know if we said, but all these movies, these last couple, are like got poor to very, like mixed to very poor reviews.
I would say Zero Theorem feels a little bit like, you know, The Poor Man's Brazil. It's like a lot of the same themes, and you can just tell it was made on a very shoestring budget for how visually audacious he wants it to be. Like it still looks great, but there's just a feeling of constraint about like the number of characters and locations and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth seeing, but it's like it's not my favorite, but it's also not my least favorite. It would be somewhere in the middle of my Terry Gilliam viewing. And then Brothers Grimm, I would say, again, I haven't seen that since it was in the theaters, but I think that might be my very least favorite Terry Gilliam movie.
I think he said that had the most studio interference, and he wasn't very happy with how it turned out.
It felt
it's
like
kind of a run of the mill. You know, I actually, there was another movie about Hansel and Gretel that was made that was just like a kind of one of those B movies that I liked more.
Yikes.
It was very similar, you know. It was very
I
similar.
think they came out around the same time, didn't they?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, as action, as like Monster Hunters or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so we're all out of time, so we need to wrap this up. So how about just some final thoughts on this whole experience of watching or rewatching these Terry Gilliam movies. So Matt, final thoughts.
Yeah, so I still love Terry Gilliam. He is one of my favorite directors. I think that his films are not your typical run-of-the-mill Hollywood fare, and that's what I like about them. Sometimes because of that, they can drag or sag in the middle. They sometimes tend to be a little long, but my favorite of his films, and one of my favorite movies of all times, is Time Bandits. And if you haven't seen it, you need to go see it now. But also, which we didn't talk about on this, or not that much on this panel, is 12 Monkeys and Fisher King. 12 Monkeys is one of my favorite, other than Time Bandits, time travel films of all time. And Fisher King is just like a wonderful exploration of mental illness and suffering, and really it's a lot of humanity in that film. But yeah, I mean, Terry Gilliam, great director. Check out his films if you haven't. They're not for everyone, but I think there's a lot to enjoy there.
Yeah. Tom, final thoughts?
I agree with everything Matt just said, except that his films aren't for everyone. I think that you're right about most of his films, but I think Time Bandits is almost for everyone. It's like a Lost Monty Python movie. It's very funny. It's got a better plot than any of the Python movies. It's every second is a joy to watch. Just the love that he put into every little corner of that movie is astounding that he could pull all that off, even to the opening titles, which look like CGI but aren't because of his brilliance with animation. It was back before there really was CGI, but he made it look like there was. And yeah, I think, overall, I'm envious of this guy who just was born with this fantastic, fertile imagination superpower, and then was able to make a living off it and make so many great works of art out of it, despite the fact that nobody wanted him to do it, that he had to fight for every inch of what he did. And sometimes it crashed, sometimes the wagon went off the trail, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it soared beautifully. Things are perfect. So I'm really envious of a guy who can be born with that gift and not waste it and make it into everything that he made it into. My hat's really off to him. I think he's an astounding human being.
Yeah, cool. And Chandler, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would not be the writer that I am without Terry Gilliam. I mean, he has, totally taken a permanent residence in my own imagination, which I think is such a testament to his. I think that, it's worth seeing any of his movies, but I think for the uninitiated, I don't know. I guess it depends on, if you hate your job, watch Brazil. If you're falling in love, watch Fisher King. And, if you're in a dark place and want to stay there, watch Tideland. So I guess I'll leave people with that.
And if you're turning into Don Quixote, watch that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like some of these movies like 12 Monkeys and Holy Grail, that he's done are, all-time favorites of mine. I definitely, Brazil was way better than I was expecting. So it had totally, to me, earned its reputation as a must-watch movie. And like I said, I mean, like a lot of his movies are not as disciplined as I would maybe like, but it's impossible at some level not to love them and love him because he's just so passionate. And like Tom said, so imaginative, and that just comes through in everything that he does. And so, just be aware that, the movies might go on longer than you want them to, but there's good stuff in all of them that makes them worth watching. And maybe we can come back sometime and talk about some of these other ones. But for now, we're going to have to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Matthew Kressel, Tom Gerencer, and Chandler Klang Smith. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Goodbye.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Matthew Kressel, Tom Gerencer, and Chandler Klang Smith for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.